The summer, of course, really the start of a precipitous decline for Donald Trump in his behavior. Bad gets worse, and his poll numbers drop because of it. But North Carolina, of course, a place where most commentators said Trump led the crowd in what could only be described as fascist chants. That's what a lot of commentators are saying, the whole send them back, send her home. What about last night? Was it a calmer affair last night in North Carolina with Donald Trump?
So we were in Fayetteville, North Carolina last night. I was part of the press pool that traveled there to cover the president's rally. We were only about 100 miles from the site of the previous rally in Greenville, where the racist sender back chants about those four Democratic congresswomen of color, and in particular Representative Omar, who was born in Somalia. Those chants were heard and really rattled Republicans and sort of seemed to really set a tone for a really ugly year and a half here of a campaign fought along the lines of race and divisiveness. We didn't hear those chants last night. The crowd never got anywhere. The president also did not mention any of those congresswomen, so there was no moment for them to start with that chant again. We've now had a few rallies in which we have not heard it. But last night's rally is still potentially an interesting moment for this president because of today's special election in North Carolina, where he is trying to push a Republican candidate across the finish line to win an open seat there, and it's being viewed sort of as a referendum on his political clout right now. It's the district. Is part of it is suburban areas or outside Charlotte, where he has struggled in the past. It's a seat that Republicans have held for quite some time, but polling indicates it's pretty close. And we saw from the president, this is his first time in this rally setting, which of course is where he likes to vent and to sort of air his grievances, since a really tough end of summer for him, where we saw his poll numbers slip. We saw signs that the economy is slowing down, potentially leading towards a recession. We saw a nonsensical battle over hurricane weather forecasts. But he largely stuck to the script, as if he ever actually has one, last night. But he made it clear. He painted a bleak picture for this nation if Democrats were to win. According to him, that it would be overrun with crime and poverty and illegal immigrants. And he basically made it clear that if you want to keep what we have, you need to keep me and ideally in office, and ideally send this Republican to the House.
So, Willie, before we get to our top news story of the day, I saw a poll that David Leonhardt put out on Twitter last night that showed that the Democrats actually had an advantage in 2018 on party identification, and it wasn't really even close. Now, a year later, after the first three Democratic debates, it's even as far as party identification. What do you support, Republicans, or do you support Democrats? Are you Republican? It's now down the middle, and so much of that is not because of Donald Trump, whose numbers have fallen precipitously. It's those debates where Democrats are ridiculing Obamacare as being too conservative, attacking Barack Obama on immigration, talking about decriminalizing illegal immigration, talking about giving health care plans to illegal immigrants, talking about forgiving basically all debt, medical debt, student debt, $22 trillion in debt as a nation. For a lot of Americans, this just doesn't add up.
Yeah, and that's why you've seen Joe Biden remain where he is, because he hasn't gone into that territory. For all the problems he's had, for all the mistakes he's made and the misstatements he's made on the campaign trail, he hasn't gone to that place of eliminating private insurance and providing health care to people who are here with undocumented. So that is the central concern in this race. If you let Donald Trump just do his thing, Democrats feel like they can beat him because he's going to bury himself. But they have to be very careful not to bury themselves in their own debate process. You're down to 10 now, coming up on Thursday. Excuse me. And, the Democrats will have to look very carefully at the way they behaved in the previous two debates, because you cannot attack this guy, Joe Biden, in the way that they've done that. You cannot attack Barack Obama, perhaps the most beloved figure in the Democratic Party and in the country, at a time when you're trying to defeat Donald Trump.
Yeah, Mika, attacking Barack Obama is being too conservative, being too harsh on health care and immigration. Most Americans remember that Barack Obama actually helped pass a law that gave coverage to those with pre-existing conditions, that took care of their older children, that did a lot of things that lowered the uninsured in America. They also actually, now that Donald Trump has made such a mess of our immigration policy, remember that under Barack Obama, illegal border crossings were at a 50-year low.
That is the case. That is the truth.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.